All right, so buckle up because today we're diving headfirst into the world of DeFi, specifically Uniswap v3.
Uniswap v3. Yeah, it's one of those things that's, well, kind of taken the whole DeFi scene by storm.
It's huge, right?
I know.
We're talking billions with a B flowing through this
It
thing.
really is the engine room of DeFi in a lot of ways.
And what we're trying to do today is, well, it's more than just saying what is Uniswap v3, because at its core, yeah, it's an exchange, but this deep dive is about understanding why it matters, how it actually works, and why so many people were excited about it.
Right, because just saying it's an exchange doesn't quite capture it, does it? Especially for something that shook things up as much as Uniswap v3 did.
Exactly. So, for anyone hearing DeFi and getting flashbacks to trying to decipher ancient Greek, it stands for decentralized finance. Think of it like traditional finance, but instead of banks and institutions calling the shots, it's all run by algorithms and code.
Exactly. It's all about open, permissionless, transparent financial systems. And that's where Uniswap, and specifically Uniswap v3, comes in. Before all of this, if you want to trade one cryptocurrency for another, you had to go through centralized exchanges.
Which, let's be honest, can feel a bit like handing over your cash in a dark alley sometimes. You just kind of hope you get what you paid for.
Right. With Uniswap, it's all out in the open, handled by code, no shadowy figures required. But the earlier versions, Uniswap v1 and v2, they had their limitations. And that's where Uniswap v3 really shook things up.
This is where it gets interesting, right? Because the Uniswap v3 white paper, it's a bit of a beast, and we'll be digging into that. But one of the big things it tackles head on is this idea of capital efficiency. Oh, yes, capital efficiency. Sounds a bit jargony, but it's actually pretty crucial to understanding why Uniswap v3 is such a big deal.
It is, but it's one of those things that's easier to explain with an analogy. Imagine, if you will, a currency exchange booth.
This is where I know things are about to get good. Your analogies always bring the concepts to life.
Got to keep things interesting, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you walk up to this booth. You've got your dollars. You want to swap them for euros, maybe for a fun trip abroad. But this booth, for some reason, insists that you split your dollars evenly between every single currency they have. Okay, I'm seeing where this is going. You're trying to get your hands on some euros, and they're making you divide your money between yen, pounds, even those currencies you can barely pronounce.
Exactly. And most of it just ends up sitting there, not really doing much. That's kind of how Uniswap v1 and v2 worked with what they called the constant product formula. A lot of the money people put in, the liquidity, wasn't being used efficiently.
It's like having a toolbox full of tools, but you're only allowed to use a hammer no matter what the job is.
Love it. And that's where Uniswap v3 swoops in with its big innovation, concentrated liquidity.
Which is a fancy way of saying they found a way to make your money work smarter, not harder.
Okay, so less spreading our money thin like that peanut butter on a piece of toast.
Always with the food analogies.
What can I say? I'm a visual person. But yeah, less like peanut butter and more like laser focusing that liquidity where we want it to go.
Exactly. Now, instead of that crazy currency exchange booth, Uniswap v3 is like, hey, you pick the price range where you want to provide liquidity, dollars to euros. No problem. We'll focus your funds right there.
So instead of our money being spread across this whole spectrum of prices, hoping some of it lands in the right spot, it's like we get to draw a little circle around the prices where we think the action is.
Precisely. And this is where the Uniswap v3 white paper really gets into the weeds, talking about positions and ticks. Those are the building blocks of how they actually achieve this concentrated liquidity.
Ticks always makes me think of a clock, which probably isn't helpful. What are ticks in the context of Uniswap v3?
It's easy to get tripped up on the terminology. Imagine the price of an asset moving like a line on a graph, right?
Mhm.
Now imagine dividing that line into tiny, tiny segments. Those are your ticks.
So each tick represents a very narrow price range. Instead of spreading our liquidity across the whole line, we can pick which of these little segments we want to zero in on. And that's our position, like placing a bet on a specific price range.
You got it. It's about giving people more control over how their money's being used, more targeted, more efficient. And this is a big part of why people got so excited about Uniswap v3. But hold on, we've only just scratched the surface here. Remember how we mentioned fees? There's a lot more to uncover about how those work in Uniswap v3, and it gets really interesting.
So fees. In Uniswap v1 and v2, every trade had that 0.3% fee, right?
Right, 0.3% across the board.
But something always felt a little off about that to me. It's like, imagine walking into a store where a pack of gum costs the same as a diamond necklace.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. It's not exactly the most sensible pricing strategy, is it?
Exactly. And it's Kind of similar with fees in a decentralized exchange. In the old Uniswap, trading those stablecoins, the ones pegged to the US dollar, meant paying the same fee as trading those, well, let's just say more volatile assets.
Yeah.
You know the meme coins, the ones that are like a roller coaster you're not sure you want to ride.
Yeah, the ones that keep you on the edge of your seat. But you're right, that fee structure didn't quite reflect the different levels of risk involved.
Right. Because trading stablecoins, that's relatively low risk, at least in the grand scheme of the crypto universe. But those more, shall we say, exciting assets.
The ones with the potential for massive gains, but also massive wipeouts, yeah, those come with a different risk profile altogether.
Exactly. And that's where Uniswap v3 said, hold on, one size doesn't fit all here. They introduced flexible fees.
Which, to be fair, the white paper dives into in quite a bit of detail, but the gist is, instead of having this one-fee-fits-all approach, they said, why not let the market decide?
Ah, the wisdom of the market, right.
In a way, yes. Basically, they created a system where you can have multiple liquidity pools for the same pair of tokens. So instead of just one big pool for, say, ETH and USDC, you can have several, each with its own fee tier.
So it's like that story we were talking about earlier suddenly got a whole lot more organized. Different sections, different price points, all clearly labeled.
Exactly. Want to trade stablecoins? Nice and steady? Head to the pool with the 0.05% fee. Feeling adventurous? Ready to roll the dice on those meme coins? Be prepared for a higher fee, maybe even 1% or more, to reflect that risk.
So it's not just about being more efficient with how much of your money is actually being used, but also about having options that align with how you want to trade, right?
Exactly. It's about aligning risk and reward. And this is where things get really neat, because remember how we were talking about ticks earlier? Those tiny price ranges?
Yeah, those little segments on the price line.
Well, those play a role in the fees too. You can actually have different fees for providing liquidity at different tick ranges within the same trading pair.
Okay, hold on. Things just got a bit more complex.
Just a bit. But stick with me. It makes sense when you think about it. So you have this trading pair, right? And within that pair, you have all these tiny price ranges represented by the ticks. Now, if you're providing liquidity really close to the current market price in a very tight range.
You're basically saying, I'm willing to take on more risk because I'm betting the price won't move much.
Exactly. You're acting as an insurer against big price swings, but in a very narrow band. So the fees are higher because you're taking on more risk. On the other hand, if you provide liquidity across a wider price range,
Your risk is lower, so the fees are lower. You're basically casting a wider net.
you got it.
Yeah.
So it all ties together, you see. The concentrated liquidity, the ticks, the flexible fees. And it's all about giving users more control, more flexibility, and the ability to tailor their experience to their own risk appetite.
Okay, my brain's doing a bit of a workout trying to keep up with all these moving parts, but I'm starting to see how it all connects. But let's shift gears for a second, because there's another crucial piece of this puzzle we haven't really touched on yet. Oracles. It sounds very mystical, but it's actually quite important, right?
Yeah. Oracles, they're essential.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right, the name does have a certain cryptic ring to it, doesn't it? But at their core, oracles are all about providing reliable data. In the context of Uniswap v3, it's all about getting accurate price information for the assets being traded.
It's like we're consulting some kind of all-seeing, DeFi oracle who whispers the true prices to us.
Right. But in this case, our oracle is powered by math, not magic, thankfully. Though it can feel a bit like magic sometimes, especially when you get into the weeds of how they ensure the accuracy and reliability of this price data.
Because, let's be real, accurate price data is kind of important when you're dealing with, billions of dollars sloshing around.
It's the bedrock of the whole system. If you have bad data, you get bad outcomes. Garbage in, garbage out, as they say. And that's something Uniswap v3 really wanted to get right.
And they actually made some pretty significant improvements with their Oracle system in this version, didn't they?
Oh, yeah, they did. In Uniswap v3, they introduced something called a time-weighted average price oracle, or TWAP for short.
TWAP. Catchy. But what does it actually mean?
Well, without getting too technical, it's essentially a more robust and tamper-proof way to track prices over time. It smooths out any short-term price fluctuations or, and this is important, any attempts to manipulate the price data.
So it's like having a more stable, more accurate price feed. That makes sense.
Yep.
And a more trustworthy platform overall, right?
Exactly. Because the last thing you want is for someone to be able to game the system, pump and dump the price, and throw everything out of whack. The TWAP Oracle adds an extra layer of security and reliability, which is crucial when you're dealing with people's money.
Absolutely. It's like having a really good, trustworthy set of scales when you're trading. You need to know they're accurate. But, okay, we've talked about capital efficiency, flexible fees, oracles. I feel like we're missing one last piece of the puzzle here. What about governance? We touched on this idea of UNI token holders having a say in how things run, right?
Right, governance. So UNI is the governance token of Uniswap.
Mhm.
Think of it like a share of voting rights. The more UNI you hold, the more say you have in how the protocol
For it's
evolves.
like a digital democracy for DeFi.
In a way, it is. And with Uniswap v3, they gave even more power to UNI holders. They can vote on things like fee distribution, which is a big deal, because it directly impacts how profitable it is to provide liquidity to the protocol.
So if enough UNI holders believe that, say, the fee for a certain pool needs adjusting, they can actually band together and make that happen.
Exactly. It's all about giving the community a voice, aligning incentives, and making sure the protocol is working in everyone's best interest. It's this fascinating experiment in decentralized governance, really.
It is, because it's not just about the tech, right? It's also about how that tech is governed and who gets to call the shots. And Uniswap v3 clearly took this idea of decentralization to heart. But, and there's always a but, isn't there? Did it actually work? Did Uniswap v3 live up to all the hype?
Ugh. The million-dollar question. It's like baking a cake, right? You can follow the recipe perfectly, but the final product depends on so many factors. The oven, the ingredients, even the weather that day.
Okay, so you're saying Uniswap v3 gave us the recipe for a more efficient, customizable, user-centric DeFi experience. But whether that cake rose to the occasion, well, that's up for debate.
Precisely. Let's start with the positives. Capital efficiency. Uniswap v3 delivered in spades. This wasn't just a small improvement, it's a complete game changer. Before v3, DeFi felt a bit like a sleepy town, V3 rolled in and it was like suddenly they were building a skyscraper. More people, more activity, more opportunities.
It turned DeFi into a bustling metropolis. But you said there were layers to this. What's the catch?
Well, remember those concentrated liquidity positions, the ticks we talked about? They give you incredible control, right? You're in the driver's seat. But, and you knew this was coming, that control comes with a learning curve.
It's like the difference between driving an automatic and a stick shift.
Right. Perfect analogy. With Uniswap v3, you really need to know what you're doing. You need to understand how to manage your positions, how to choose the right fee tiers, how to avoid something called impermanent loss, which we haven't even touched on today.
Let's save that one for another deep dive.
Agreed. But the point is, Uniswap v3, while powerful, isn't exactly the most beginner-friendly platform. And that complexity can be a barrier for some.
So, more potential rewards, but also more potential for, let's call them learning experiences.
Exactly. And that highlights this constant tension in the DeFi space.
Yeah.
How do you balance innovation with accessibility? How do you create something powerful and flexible, but also easy to use and understand?
It makes you wonder, who is DeFi really for? Is it just for the crypto savvy, the coders, the risk takers, or can it truly be a system that empowers everyone?
That's the question, isn't it? And it's one we're all grappling with. Uniswap v3 didn't magically solve everything. In some ways, it created new challenges. But that's the beauty of this space. It's dynamic, it's constantly evolving, it forces us to rethink things.
So where does that leave our listener, the one who just bravely dove headfirst into the world of Uniswap v3 with us?
I'd say the biggest takeaway is this. Uniswap v3 wasn't just a software update, it was a statement. It showed the world what's possible when you combine innovative technology with this commitment to decentralization and user empowerment. And it sparked a whole wave of innovation in the DeFi space. It's like opening a door to a room full of possibilities, some of which we probably haven't even imagined yet.
And who knows, maybe our next deep dive will be exploring those very possibilities. But until then, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of Uniswap v3.